In this case, we follow the disappearance of a young girl named Rowan Ford, who vanished from her bedroom in the middle of the night. Her story took many unexpected turns as the police began their investigation, leading to a shocking discovery about her fate. Rowan Ford, born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California, moved with her mother, Colleen, to the small town of Stella, Missouri, after her parents' divorce. Colleen remarried a man named David, and together they had a daughter. Rowan had a close relationship with her two sisters and two brothers. She was an active, outdoorsy girl who loved riding her bike, swimming, and drawing. She also volunteered at the local church, helping children with their Sunday school tasks. On November 2, 2007, Rowan, at 9 years old, stayed home alone while her mother worked the night shift and her stepfather was on the farm. The following morning, Colleen came home to find her daughter missing. She asked David about Rowan's whereabouts, and he claimed she had asked to sleep over at a friend's house. He didn't think much of it since their town was small, and he trusted Rowan. But when Colleen checked with Rowan's friends, none of them had seen her, prompting immediate concern. Colleen searched the town for her daughter, but found no trace. Desperate, she called the police. The sheriff, suspicious of David's story, began investigating, especially after David gave conflicting details about the events of that night. David said he had checked on Rowan before going out to drink with friends, but investigators were doubtful. They learned David had borrowed his mother's car that night, a detail he had initially failed to mention. The police took both his car and his pickup truck for examination, but no evidence surfaced. The police turned their attention to David's friends, Christopher and Nathan, who had been with him that night. Christopher's account matched David's, and he even passed a polygraph test. But investigators felt something was off about him. Christopher eventually approached Sheriff Clark, a longtime family friend, and during their conversation, the sheriff began suspecting Christopher was withholding something important. He shared his suspicions with the FBI, who then focused their attention on Christopher. Christopher, feeling the pressure, eventually confessed that he did not rule out David's involvement and even suggested wearing a wire to gather more information from him. The police, however, decided against this tactic and instead asked Christopher about possible places where David could have hidden Rowan's body. He provided several locations, and police began searching those areas. Despite multiple interrogations, David continued to deny any involvement. Christopher continued to meet with the sheriff, and despite his initial denials, it became increasingly clear that he may have had more information that could implicate David. As the investigation unfolded, it became evident that David's story was falling apart, and Christopher's role in the mystery remained a key focus. FBI agents instructed the sheriff to continue trying to convince Christopher to speak, believing that he had valuable information he was too afraid to share. On November 7th, police called Christopher back to the station to get his consent to search his safe, trailer, and car, as he had been living with David temporarily. Christopher agreed and even provided a DNA sample. During the interview, he initially confirmed David's version of events, but then admitted that parts of David's story were not true. When pressed for more details, Christopher became agitated, stating that if he was going to be treated like a criminal, he wouldn't continue talking. The interview ended, and Christopher left the station. Later that day, he went to Sheriff Clark and expressed frustration over being treated as a suspect, mentioning that he might need a lawyer. Clark reassured him that the police were just trying to find Rowan and persuaded him to keep talking. Christopher broke down emotionally, stating he loved Rowan and would never harm her. After a brief interruption, he left without revealing any more details. Sheriff Clark informed the FBI, noting that Christopher was close to revealing what he knew, but warned against pushing him too hard. The search for Rowan continued, but there was no progress. On November 9th, Rowan's body was found in a pit near Powell, 10 miles from Stella. The discovery shifted the investigation, and the FBI asked Clark to speak with Christopher again. The sheriff learned that earlier Christopher had visited the station, but left without seeing him. He later called Clark, distressed, and worried that someone was following him after hearing the news of Rowan's body being found. Clark arranged to meet him, and when they did, Christopher expressed fear of being accused of murder and potentially facing revenge. Clark took him to the station, where he urged Christopher to reveal everything now that the case was classified as a homicide. Christopher then broke down and told a shocking version of events. He confessed that he had planned to sexually assault Rowan, and after taking her from David's house, he drove her to his trailer and attacked her. When she tried to resist, he strangled her with a rope and later disposed of her body in a pit, trying to cover it with branches. He also admitted to burning evidence in a barrel. This confession left Sheriff Clark in disbelief, as he had known Christopher for nearly 20 years and never suspected him of such brutality. Afterward, Christopher agreed to go to the station, where he repeated his confession and was arrested. David was initially questioned by authorities and vehemently denied any involvement in the horrific crime. His story shifted, however, when he later admitted to sexually assaulting and killing Rowan, a disturbing confession that was followed by a claim that he had carried out the crime alongside Christopher. His statement contradicted the confession made by Christopher, where he insisted that David had no role in the murder. This discrepancy raised serious concerns for the detectives, and they promptly returned to Christopher to confront him with David's new claims. Christopher, however, remained steadfast in his denial, insisting that David was not involved in the crime. The conflicting testimonies from both men created a complex and puzzling case for the investigators, but they found substantial physical evidence, such as forensic findings and items tied to both suspects, that seemed to point to David's involvement in the crime. With mounting evidence, David was arrested, but the case remained mired in confusion due to the opposing accounts given by the two men. Christopher's trial was highly contentious and played out in the public eye, drawing significant attention. His defense team argued that his confession should be inadmissible, claiming that his rights had been violated during the interrogation process. The judge, however, ruled that the confession was valid, citing that Christopher had not been coerced and had voluntarily confessed to his role in the crime. The judge also determined that the confession was a crucial piece of evidence, ultimately leading to Christopher's sentencing to death in 2012. Despite multiple appeals and legal battles, Christopher's attempts to overturn the conviction failed, leaving him on death row with little hope of avoiding execution. However, in many cases, death row sentences are subject to years of delays, and there remains a possibility that Christopher may eventually serve a life sentence instead. David, meanwhile, faced a significantly lighter sentence than many believe was warranted for his involvement in the crime. Initially, he had been facing charges of murder alongside Christopher, but the prosecution ultimately decided not to pursue the murder charge against him. The case against David lacked the clear-cut evidence needed to convict him of murder, and prosecutors opted to charge him with lesser offenses, including child endangerment and obstruction of justice. This decision sparked public outrage, as many felt that the legal system had failed to deliver justice, especially given the severity of the crime. Despite his involvement in the brutal assault and murder of Rowan, David was sentenced to just 11 years in prison. This sentencing was met with widespread disbelief, with many questioning the leniency shown to David, in contrast to the harsh punishment faced by Christopher. The decision further fueled debates surrounding the fairness of the criminal justice system, particularly regarding sentencing disparities for individuals involved in such heinous acts. As of now, David remains incarcerated, serving his reduced sentence, while Christopher remains on death row, awaiting the uncertain outcome of his appeal process. Both men's cases continue to capture public attention, raising concerns about the reliability of confessions, the treatment of suspects during interrogation, and the balance of justice for victims and perpetrators alike.